Achewillow. Chapter 8. Enter the Inquisition. 2 days, 2 dead bodies. These are not statistics I'm comfortable living my life with, nor is it a trend I want to see continuing. A lot of people would be grossed out by the grisly appearance of a dead body. It's unsettling. I think we're just hardwired to react to empty eyes. The empty abdominal cavity doesn't help either. I don't love the gory display of a dead body. It's downright traumatizing. But as I look at the dead woman behind the bank, I realize it's not the missing organs or even the white, bloodless skin that gets me. Whoever this woman was, she's wearing a warm red sweater, loose knit, over a t-shirt and some jeans. One of her sneakers, which were once white but are now a worn ivory, is hanging off the tip of her toes. Her socks match her sweater. This woman, who might only be a few years older than me and has hair longer but the same color as mine, probably chose that outfit yesterday morning, making a point of picking red socks and sweater. Maybe she had a similar combination in a different color ready for today. Maybe she was meeting someone whose favorite color is red. That's what gets me. The waste of humanity. How a person can wake up one morning, set aside a red knit sweater, maybe a gift from a family member or something she made herself, put on some whimsically matching socks, and never make it home. Her face is frozen in the expression of her last moments, and those final seconds were passed in terror. Her eyes are bulging in horror at where her stomach used to be. My mind can too easily imagine what it is she went through. My own blood is seeping through the towel on my arm, making my fingers sticky and reminding me of the vision from last night. The demon behind the Achewillow Cafe. Do I believe what I saw? If not, I might as well not believe what's in front of me right now, because there's no way in hell these two events aren't connected. Miriam? My phone asks in a scratchy electronic voice. It took me a moment after finding the body to gather the wherewithal to call 911. My first thought was to run, not just from the alley, but from Achewillow itself. Sprint back to the street, find a taxi, and pay whatever it costs to get me back to Montreal. The big city might have a higher crime rate, but at least they're committed by human beings, not gray-skinned demons. Yes? We've been on the phone a few minutes now. The operator with a thick French accent identified herself as Jacinthe, and she's been patient enough so far. She quizzed me on the basics. My name, what the emergency was. Am I sure the woman I found is dead? Trust me, Jacinthe, she's super dead, and I hope to God she doesn't get up to prove me otherwise. She tolerated my screaming, "The demon got her," a few times before I got my wits about me and gave her my location. Someone should be coming up the alley from behind you. His name is Detective Lemore, and he'll take over for me. Is that okay? I guess is the best I can do for an answer. The word detective still has a sour bite to it. But I've heard of this Detective Lemore. His name was in the first article I read about the Achewillow murders. He's supposed to be the one in charge of the investigation on the Quebec side of the border, which makes me wonder why he wasn't there a week ago behind the cafe. Madame Dufour? His voice is old and tired and rough, but polite enough. He too has a thick French accent. Or maybe he's speaking to me in French? Yes? Oui? I hate it when I don't know what language I should speak to people, and my French is a little rusty. Unless I'm talking about food. Despite his used voice, he still looks like he could be in his prime. As opposed to Wilson, who tries too hard to be like a Hollywood detective, Lemore looks like a librarian with a badge and a gun. He's nearly bald and wears a cardigan instead of a raincoat. I'd put him in his late 50s to early 60s, but under those slacks he seems to keep in shape. His walk is confident and quick, and before I know it, he's holding my forearm and easing me to the ground. "All right," he says, his voice soft but uncomfortable with English. "I've got an ambulance coming. They'll have a look at your arm." The arm is unrelated. I'm fine. Kneeling next to me, still holding my forearm, he arches his thick gray eyebrows. He still hasn't even looked in the corpse's direction. "Oh, honey," he says, patting the back of my hand. "You're not fine. You're as pale as a sheet." "I just haven't slept much." He smiles in a fatherly way, like I just said something very silly. And really, haven't I? I've been standing in the same spot for almost 15 minutes, unable to move my eyes and barely blinking. What are the chances I'm in shock and not just a little sleep-deprived? "What happened to your arm?" he asks, following my eyes for the first time and wincing at the sight. "Raccoon bite," I explain, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "The Dawn?" "Does everyone know that trash bandit?" "How do you know?" Detective Lamore's smile broadens, showing old cigarette-stained teeth, and he pulls up his sleeve. Near his elbow, he's got what look like old scars, deep and bone-white, where hair no longer grows. "I've had my run-in with the fat bastard, too. Plus, with the name Dufour, I figured you were probably connected with the Achewillow Cafe, and that's where the Don holds court." So far, he's a better detective than Wilson, and a nicer human being. Doesn't hurt we have a common enemy. He pats my hand again and pulls himself to his feet, walking calmly towards the dead body. Each of his steps is careful and measured. Not a pebble is shifted by his approach, and he doesn't so much as disturb the dust on the concrete. From under his cardigan, he pulls a cheap ballpoint pen, which he uses to poke and prod at the dead woman. Nothing intrusive or that might spoil evidence. All of it as respectful as he can be. "Why are they all women?" I ask from across the alley. Lamore doesn't turn. Instead, he digs again in the pocket of his cardigan, pulling out a pair of reading glasses, which he puts on his nose, closer to the tip than the bridge. "Serial killers tend to have a type. Usually it's a look, like gender, hair length and color, age. Sometimes it's an occupation, like nurses or cashiers. The amount of criteria varies from one killer to the next, but it's usually an indicator of their level of sophistication. That explains things if it's a serial killer, but not why a demon would pick on only women. What are demons after, anyway? Souls? Raccoons? Pastries? Do you know what or who is killing these women?" "I wish," he says, sighing at the implications. It's a stupid question. If he knew, he'd make an arrest or at least keep a suspect under surveillance. There's been 2 murders in a week. A suspect would be in custody, wouldn't they? "There is this one guy," he muses after a moment. "Murders only happen when he's in town, and he's only ever around 1 or 2 days a week. But aside from a gut feeling and what could be a coincidence..." Lamore sounds disappointed, like he's being held back and could solve this if only he'd be allowed to follow his instinct. It's not just a professional letdown either. The way he looks at that woman on the ground, her back leaned against the concrete wall of the bank, he seems to take every life lost as a personal burden. Red lights bounce around the entrance to the alley, announcing the arrival of an ambulance and EMTs. Maybe I won't need to go to the hospital at all if they can clean and dress my wound here. Then I can get back to the cafe. I'd love to go up to the apartment and get a nap, but there's no hope I'll find sleep with what I've seen. "I think I know who you're talking about, and it's not him," I say, surprising myself by defending Gulliver. Then again, I know for a fact he didn't do anything, now don't I? I saw the demon with my own eyes. Didn't I? "Oh, I expect you know the man in question, but I don't think you know him enough. We're talking about Gulliver, all right. Seems like he managed to land himself on the wrong side of the law on both sides of the border. Wilson made my paranoia flare up with his accusations, but it's Lemore's quiet assurance that cements the suspicions in my heart. The demon is missing his lower abdomen, like the victim's. So maybe it too is a victim? If that's the case, then what's the link between Gulliver and the creature? I contemplate telling Lemore about the connection. Sure, he'll think I'm a madwoman, maybe delirious from shock or perhaps pain from my wounds, but he is from Achewillow. Maybe there's something to the weird things I've seen. And wouldn't Lemore be the perfect person to know? I open my mouth to speak my mind, but just as I'm about to talk, a short, muscular woman squats in front of me, pulling on some latex gloves, the embroidered patch on her shoulder identifying her as a paramedic. "Hey there, honey," she says, offering an open hand for me to give her my arm. "Mind if I have a look at that?" Detective Lemore seems like a man I could talk to about what I've seen, but not in front of a bunch of strangers. Say what you will about finding a dead body, it makes for a decent excuse to get the medical professionals to come to you instead of having to wait at the hospital. No stitches. Thank God for small favors, I guess, but I get some painful disinfectant liquid on the bites and scratches and some serious bandaging. I'm halfway back to the Achewillow when I realize no one said anything about rabies shots. I stop in my tracks, intent on turning around and asking about that, when I'm reminded what Olivia said. The dawn keeps clean. Maybe I don't trust the raccoon, but I think I can trust Olivia. Or maybe I just don't want to deal with detectives and dead bodies anymore today. I find the Achewillow very much the way I left it, except with fewer disappointed customers waiting for me. The lights are off and the chairs are on the tables. The counter is clear and the display is empty. It's strange how wrong seeing the cafe like this in the middle of the day feels. I'm not usually a creature of habit, but I got used to the Achewillow being alive. Maybe I could open for the afternoon. That wouldn't be so bad, would it? Enough sunlight filters in from the streets that I don't need to turn on the ceiling lights, which is a good thing if I want to keep people from assuming we're open. Then again, if they see me hanging around the dining room or behind the counter, they're bound to start knocking on the window. Olivia left her crate of apples on the counter, which I'm forced to assume was meant for me again. That cements it. I'll take the apples and hide in the kitchen, baking and cooking, away from prying eyes. Just after I lay my head down for 5 minutes, I whisper to myself, pulling up a stool and sitting down. My skull nestles between my folded arms as I lean forward, savoring the cool surface of the counter on my skin. I'm careful not to pull on my wounded arm and start it bleeding again. My mind ponders how such small bites and scratches can hemorrhage so much, and whether the furry little bastard's stupid teeth and claws are going to leave a scar. Not that I'm particular about nicks and scrapes. I've cut my hands often enough, and I've got the discolored lines to prove it. There are constellations of dark specks on my forearms from where burning oil has splashed me in the past. I once read that scars are like tattoos with better stories. I want to agree, but I also don't want to take away anything from the ink I do have on my skin. From where I'm sitting, I can see the sideways image of the back door peeking from the threshold of the kitchen. The doorknob on it isn't very much in line with the aesthetic of the Achewillow Cafe. It's bulky and made of steel, equipped with a sturdy lock. To think that just last week it was the only thing that kept that demon at bay. There's a grinding and clicking, and the handle begins to slowly turn. It's weird, as I know for a fact that I locked the door the previous night. The memory is etched clearly in my mind, burned in by the power of adrenaline, so I expect that if someone is trying to get in from the back, they'll be disappointed the moment they push on the door. I'm wrong. Hinges squeak softly as the door to the alley opens a crack. Sun, bright and blinding, slices the frame of the door, blinding me for a moment. I ponder in mild amusement if perhaps this is how the raccoons keep breaking in and stealing my salt. It's only amusing because I don't know how the garbage dwellers pull it off. There's no sound of tiny paws on ceramic tiles or the hissing of discontent vermin. Instead, the wedge of brilliant light is broken by a gangly silhouette. Long fingers wrap around the frame on one side and the door itself on the other, pushing them apart and pulling in the owner of the limbs. It's familiar, yet so much more terrible when cut out from the light. The same demon that threatened me last night is back. Where it left in a hurry, bounding off into the night, it's now creeping into the Achewillow with slow, purposeful steps. Nails like claws slide over the metallic surface of the door, and I can hear its dragging feet brushing on the floor. My brain demands that my limbs come to life, arms pushing against the counter and moving me to my feet, legs propelling me to the front door and the safety of the street. No matter how much I will it, nothing moves. The demon, so clear in the daylight, keeps getting closer. It lacks eyes that I can see, but I can feel it looking at me. I know, somehow, that it's angry and resentful for previous nights. Not only was it denied entrance on my first evening in Achewillow, but when it did find its way inside the cafe, there was nothing in the display for it to take. There's only a few inches separating us now, and I can see vengeance in the hollow of its eyes and smell anger on its breath. It drags its nails on the counter, leaving gouges in the varnish and wood. These are surgeon's tools, sharp as chisels and just as capable of gutting me as a fillet knife. I want to scream, to run, to fight, but all I can do is lie there, arms folded on the counter, feeling the vibrations of the scratching nails. The smell of rotting meat is inescapable as the demon leans in to take a bite. Blunt teeth, dripping with thick, putrefying saliva, push my hair aside and touch the crown of my skull. In a moment, it'll crack the bones in my head, then sink itself into the soft tissue of my brain, the only saving grace being the speed at which it'll all be over. "Pardon me, ma'am?" I jump out of my skin. The touch is on my shoulder instead of my scalp. It is gentle and hesitant, not ravenous and hungry. The demon is gone, and the back door to the Achewillow remains closed. I can move again, and like a bolt of lightning shot through me, I'm standing on both feet, my stool toppling to the floor. "I'm sorry," comes the voice again, tired and apologetic. "I didn't mean to startle you." I know the voice, and I recognize its owner, but only barely. It's the woman who ordered the orange poppy honey cake. While I may want to complain about my own lack of sleep, she probably envies how well rested I must look. Already gaunt and exhausted when I handed her the cake, she somehow looks even worse. The eyes are as sunken as the demon's, and her fingers now have a palsy to them, shaking uncontrollably with every movement. My head is still spinning, caught in a cloud of confusion baked into the nightmare I was woken from. I run my fingers over the counter, intact where it was scratched by unnatural claws a moment ago. "How?" I murmur. "The front door was open," the lady explains. "I normally wouldn't have bothered, but... The shaking in her limbs intensifies, and her hands paw around for support. They find the counter, and she uses it to lower herself onto a stool. I do my best to help support her, holding her elbow until she no longer looks like she's on the verge of fainting. Instead, she starts to cry. The last few crumbs of the dream are swept away, a swell of worry replacing them instead. I have to confess, I'm not great at comforting others. My language isn't words or even physical touch. I speak in warm, cozy soups, and I write in pastries. My alphabet is made of sauces and gravies. When a friend or family member is going through hell, I lock myself in the kitchen and cook them a little piece of heaven. Hugs and gentle pats on the hand are for others. I'm all about cookies and fancy hot chocolates. But I've already made this woman the cake she wanted. It seemed to give her so much hope and comfort. Rest, she'd said. She would finally find rest. Yet it looks like she got anything but. So I'm down to patting her hand and wondering if I should lean in for a hug. "It didn't work," she says, swallowing a sob between her words. The cake didn't work. You did it wrong. The hit to my pride is point blank and hurts. I suppress the instinct to tell her off. Like all good cooks, I taste my own cooking, and I can assure anyone who dares say otherwise, I did it right. What's wrong with it? I ask, biting my lip to stay the words I really want to say. Doris made it different. He would eat her cake and it would appease him, but something's wrong with yours. He won't touch it. It's been a few days and he won't touch it, and if he doesn't eat, he doesn't let me sleep. Oh my God. Is this woman being abused by her husband? She doesn't need a baker, she needs the cops. But something doesn't sound right about her story. How can a single cake keep a man appeased for a whole week? Also, why don't you sleep when he sleeps? She looks at me like I just told her that snow was actually icing sugar and the moon was literally made of cheese. My Gary doesn't sleep, she explains patiently, as if to a child. My Gary is dead. Dead? Outrage and confusion mix in my voice, and the result is surprisingly neutral. I don't mean to offend a client, but is she really complaining about my cake being unsuitable for her dead husband? Gary passed last spring, she explains, a pained look washing over her features. Orange poppy seed cakes were his favorite. He'd have one with a glass of warm milk to fight his insomnia. My brow knits itself into what I hope passes for compassion, but is probably more like worry. Is this how she grieves for her husband? By having some of his favorite food? It's a touching notion, and as a lover of food myself, I can't think of a more beautiful way to remember someone. It's the kind of heartfelt dedication that deserves that I pour my heart into the making of a cake. But that's the thing, isn't it? I always pour my heart into my cooking when I can. That's why even for dumb assignments from my dumb teachers, I couldn't just let their dumb instructions slide by uncontested. I'll half-ass a tray of muffins that I bake for myself, but a cake for a paying customer? A special order? No way. I gave the grieving widow everything I had on that cake. What was wrong with it? I ask. Was the taste off? Maybe something about the texture? I don't know, she replies. Gary just didn't want it. It didn't work. Is this woman feeding my cake to her dead husband? How? I imagine for a moment that she keeps his remains in her home and tries to stuff the dessert into his dead mouth. It's a morbid thought, baked from the ingredients of a morbid day. More likely, she brings the cake to his grave as an offering, like pouring one out, but with a little bit more class. Neither image explains how she knows Gary didn't like my painstakingly made cake. Are you sure it wasn't a lemon poppy seed cake or something else that Gary liked? Julia scowls at me, breaking from her exhaustion and bereavement for the first time since we met. No, she says, shaking her head. Gary and I have known each other since high school. I know what he likes. Maybe Doris did it differently. She really was something else. Don't feel bad if you're having trouble living up to her legacy. What the hell? What is it with Doris that people think she was so incomparable? With all due respect to the deceased, if she was that incredible, how did she never manage to break out of this backwater town? I don't really think Doris did anything that I couldn't do. I stopped short of saying, do better. Oh, I didn't mean to insult you, she says, though I struggled to see the contrition. It's just that Doris had her ways and, well, I thought maybe you did too. Why is it people expect so much of me here? I hate to lean back on this fact, but even Chef Gagnon said I was a great baker. How are people here not awed by my prowess? I don't want to seem arrogant, but I was studying to become a chef, and if it weren't for my behavioral problems, I'd still be in school and still be top of my class. What did Doris have that I don't? You do best to remember everyone's usual around here. There's a ritual to it, and believe me, you do not want to mess with ritual. Ritual. It's not about how well I bake and cook. It's about people's usual, their habits and their rituals. Small town with a closely knit community. It's no surprise that they're a little stuck in their ways, especially a slightly unhinged woman still teary-eyed about a great loss. Maybe, I say, softening my voice, I could see if Doris had a special recipe. I made you my best orange poppy seed cake, but maybe Doris had something special for hers. Maybe that's what's missing. With great effort, the widow stretches her lips into a hopeful smile. Again, her bony fingers grasp at my hand, pulling it to her. There's a surprising amount of strength in Julia's grip. It's the strength of desperation. I can see that the rest she's looking for isn't just for Gary, but also for herself. Doris was special, she says, and she did something special to her cakes, to everything she made. I can see it in your eyes. You're special too. You'll figure it out. You have to. She lets go of my hand, a little shocked with herself that she even touched me. Her smile, however, doesn't waver. One step at a time, she backs from the counter and, lips quivering, makes her way to the door. I forgot to lock it when I came in, and I must have fallen asleep on the counter. Now there's a line of potential clients waiting for Julia to make her way out so they can replace her and shower me with their culinary demands. The moment she steps outside, turning to walk, head down, back to wherever she'd come from, 2 patrons walk in to take her place. To my worry, and in a way, relief, they close and lock the door behind them. The other would-be customers don't seem amused at all, as evidenced by their muted cry of protest and the rude gestures they display. I know these 2 patrons. A short, balding man and his tall, athletic partner, both wearing exotic and identical blue business suits. Each is carrying a thin, brown leather briefcase. Also identical, these look brand new. Their surfaces shining like mirrors and their brass clasps picking up the sun in glittering sparks. The moment they make eye contact with me, they both pull out badges from their inner jacket pockets and flash them too briefly for me to read anything. I do notice a large, ornate cross next to their respective photos, similar to the ones on their cufflinks. The Inquisition. Ms. Miriam Dufour? The man asks, a friendly smile on his face. I'm sorry, I answer, knowing the futility of my next words. We're closed. We know, the woman answers with none of her partner's warmth. That's why we're here. Yes, the man adds, we wouldn't want to be a bother during your business hours. My name is Orléans, and this is my partner, Alessandria. Forgive the intrusion, but we do have some important business to discuss. I stand from my stool, finally finding the last vestiges of energy and will from what I thought was a dry well. I've had quite the day already, and I don't have time for a pair of religious zealots playing at being inquisitors. No, I say, I don't have the time or patience for this. Please get out of my cafe before I call the police. I mean it too, and I walk around the counter to where the phone is located. Hopefully it's still connected. It's not as old as a rotary phone, but it's a landline, and I'm not sure that service was included in the utilities that Helen and the notary public said were still connected. Push comes to shove, I've still got my cell phone, and the last number I dialed on that was the cops anyway. That won't be necessary, Miss Dufour, Orléans says, his tone appeasing and calm. We won't be here for very long. We just want to issue you a little warning. I'm not sure if I should be grateful or annoyed with them. Whatever they're here to warn me against, I think I've already run into it. Potential serial killers, demons, dead bodies, and maybe even a ghost hungry for orange poppy seed cake. I think I've seen everything Achewillow has to offer. They're showing up for appetizers when it's time for dessert. The annoyance must have bled through my features, judging by the growing impatience on the fate of Alessandria, if that's her real name. You'd be well served taking us seriously, Miss Dufour, she threatens. You may be in much deeper trouble than you think." "Indeed," Orleans adds, though with a softer tone. "If you don't stay on the straight and narrow, we'll be forced to take action. We'd really rather not, but we have to do our jobs, you know." What action? Incredible. They're threatening me? What do they think I'm doing here? And even if they are the legitimate Inquisition, which, let's face it, is unlikely, what do they want with a small-town coffee shop? I don't even sell deviled eggs. Is this about serving meat on Fridays or something? Alessandria puts her briefcase on top of the counter with a precise, dramatic gesture. She releases both clasps simultaneously to open the leather front and proceeds to pull out a single sheet of paper. It looks like more legal jargon. After dealing with Helen Edna, Notary Public, I've had enough of that sort of thing for a decade. She gives the paper a cursory look, then pulls out a fancy white pen that seems to be carved of ivory and signs the document. "Here." She twists the page to face me, offering me the pen. "Sign here to attest that you have been warned against the use of witchcraft and sorcery, consorting or engaging in congress with the devil and demonic creatures, communicating, raising, or otherwise interacting with the dead, or practicing rituals of magic and wizardry. Feel free to consider this your only and final warning." There's no way this isn't a prank. Maybe it's some sort of town hazing ritual to test my gullibility? Seems like a lot of effort to put into a cheap laugh. Unless they have hidden cameras, the only audience to this tasteless joke would be the 4 customers lining up outside, and if I read their features correctly, they aren't in on the joke either. In fact, they seem genuinely troubled by what they're seeing. The mustache man is at the front of the line, and when we lock eyes, he shakes his head, telling me that, no, this isn't a jest. I'm not signing this. This is outrageous. It's harassment at the very least, threats at the worst. There was a moment when I thought Achewillow was welcoming. I may have even idly entertained the notion of staying a while, charmed by the cafe and the quiet, quaint rural living, but no sooner did I start to get comfortable than the town turns on me. "Please, Miss Dufour, reconsider," Orleans pleads. "You don't want to be on the Inquisition's bad side." "Doris Dufour was a witch," Alessandria butts in, pushing her partner aside, towering over me in an attempt at intimidation. "Do you know what the Inquisition does to witches?" I want to be stronger than this, and I want to stand up to this crazy bitch. I think I've gone through enough without having to endure 2 delusional idiots. But there's something in her stance that makes me want to take her seriously. I don't know that I believe that there's such a thing as the Inquisition. If there were, I don't know that I'd believe in their authority. That doesn't matter, though. The 80s had its satanic panic. Andrea Yates killed her children, spurred by her delusions and faith. There's a precedent for crazy people turning homicidal based on religious fervor. This tall woman is real, and I can see in her eyes that she believes her Inquisition is real. I've seen a demon, and that might be enough for her to label me a witch. And what does the Inquisition do to witches? They hang, drown, or burn them. Achewillow is written by J.F. Dubow, narrated and produced by me, Amy Frost. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or your preferred podcast platform. You have no idea how much it helps. Questions, comments? Email us at achewillow@gmail.com. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under the username Achewillow.